In addition to being a famous actress, Sandra Bullock exemplifies the human capacity to overcome adversity. The audience will never forget Annie Porter's heroic struggle for survival on that frantic bus. They will never forget Lee Anne Tuohi's unwavering love, which she showed when she took a young kid in need into her home. She is a strong lady who overcame betrayals, terrifying nights, and devastating losses. She is also a dedicated mother, a producer who controlled her own fate, and an actress. On red carpets around the globe, her grin once radiated. Her gracefulness and kindness radiated off the screen. The qualities of honesty and perseverance were embodied by her name. Artist Sandra Bullock is much more than that. An emblem of perseverance, of unwavering pride, of a fire kindled by tempests. She stands tall and proud. For over 30 years she has been a fulcrum between happiness and sorrow, transforming her own personal suffering into captivating works of art. We are now entering the fiery symphony of life, where the most destructive storm is raging at the age of 61. In honor of this remarkable artist, please hit the like button before we begin. The initial breaks in her life did not originate from danger or poverty, but rather from the unadulterated grief of a child who never felt like she belonged, and that realization breaks my heart. Embrace the stillness that accompanied the ever-changing world around you. John Bullock was a disciplined and proud American vocal coach and soldier. His mother, Helga Meyer, was an opera singer from Germany whose voice could fill regal European halls. Sandra Annette Bullock was born on July 26, 1964 in Arlington, Virginia. Not carefree play, but the weight of expectation defined her days from the outset. European children learned to follow rigid rehearsal schedules amidst costumes and music as their peers played freely outside. Under the bright lights of the theater, her delicate voice compelled to blend in with children's choirs, singing Bizet and Mozart. Plus, she had experienced more cities in Germany and Austria by the time she was 10 years old than the average American student would in a lifetime. As she uprooted her life with each new chapter, she lost touch with her friends and had to face the heartbreaking reality that she had never truly belonged anywhere. Upon the family's 1976 return to the U.S., the dormant pain intensified. Peers made fun of her eccentric wardrobe choices from Nazi Germany. Every word she spoke had an accent, and that made people laugh. There was a lot of laughing, not with her, but at her, in the halls. Years of silent shame that left deep scars of solitude replaced the thrill of belonging. In retrospect, she realizes that her time spent alone at the room's edge shaped her empathy, which in turn guided her life's work and helped her recognize the other faces that had been forgotten or ignored. While English was the language of life and German the language of solace, she was torn between two selves, never quite able to inhabit either. A split screen seemed to be her life. Standing between the United States and Germany is a young girl whose melancholy has rendered her speechless, and she is ensnared in the glare of both countries. Still, she remained unharmed by those wounds. They grew stronger as a result. Empathy was forced into loneliness. A state of flexibility emerged from an unstable one. Hollywood could never create authenticity, but they could always spot it when it burned on film, and rejection became that. One day the world would listen to the little girl whose voice she had stifled in order to blend in. As time went on, the misunderstood outsider would blossom into a powerful figure who brought solace to countless people, ascending from the periphery to the core using only bravery, skill, and elegance as a means of transportation. Sandra Bullock was not a poor child. Musical influences, parental discipline, and the orderly environment they created all had an impact on her formative years. Everything changed, though, in 1986 when she dropped out of East Carolina University with only a few courses remaining to earn a degree in theater. She could have remained, completed her degree, and opted for security. Sandra preferred New York, though. The arena, the aspiration, the improbable opportunity. There was a tragic cost to that choice. For a young woman without a renowned name, influential connections, or safety net, the city was a cruel place. The opera singer's and voice coach's daughter vanished into thin air. Without a name, without money, and struggling to survive in a cruel world. Tired and with blisters on her feet, she trudged home after a night shift as a bartender, server, and coat checker. Draining funds, crammed into a cramped flat without heating during the winter's worst. Due to her extreme fatigue and unwavering determination, dinner was frequently reduced to instant noodles and harsh coffee. No, her loved ones were more than capable of pitching in. She was adamant about not relying on them. She was determined to show that she could succeed despite the industry's ruthless machinery. Honestly, the no's taught me more than the yesies ever did. As the city slept, she would recall a confession that had its origins in the nights spent practicing in the dark, mumbling lines to herself. She hardly got a passing mention in the late 1980s. Who Shot Pacango, Religion, Incan, and Hangman were quietly released and removed from theaters. No one took note. Apathy prevailed. Posters lost their color. Sandra felt as though the reels were scars, even though they accumulated dust. This serves as a poignant reminder of how easily dreams can be dashed. Still, she was not going to give up. The energy grew with each denial. Silence only served to strengthen her determination. As she confessed, those setbacks had left her with a yearning and a pain, powerful enough to prevent her from falling when others would have succumbed. This was followed in 1993 by Demolition Man. Even though it wasn't the lead role, the fact that she co-starred with Sylvester Stallone and Wesley Snipes got her noticed. Lightning bolts were set off exactly 1 year after a spark was struck. The 1994 version of Speed was never meant for her. Halle Berry was originally cast to play Annie Porter, went as far as circling the desks of A-list Hollywood celebs. Sandra brought a foldable chair and a paper plate for a steering wheel to the audition, even though she wasn't on the list. Unfiltered, exposed, and completely authentic, Keanu Reeves and I had blazing, indisputable chemistry. There was a buzz. The studio was captivated. During when instantly changing her life, Speed exploded at the box office, making $350 million worldwide on a small budget. A young woman who had to scrape by on ramen and table cleaning is now a Hollywood celebrity. Additionally, she accomplished the unthinkable once more in 1995 with While You Were Sleeping. With the same elegance she had brought to action, she conquered humor. Sandra Bullock did more than just survive. In less than a decade, she went from a New York server with blistering hands to America's sweetheart. Her astonishing career was created in the furnace of self-imposed adversity, which she transformed from obscurity into stardom and rejection into endurance. What matters most is not where you start, but rather how much you are prepared to endure for your beliefs, as her path demonstrates. Sandra Bullock went from eating ramen noodles in a freezing New York apartment to becoming a Hollywood mogul. What followed, though, was not just fame but power. Sandra secretly established Fortis Films, her own production company, when the world was still referring to her as America's sweetheart. This was her way of stating that she would not be a bystander to her own career. She started molding the stories she thought were important after landing a daring studio deal. Her producing and acting credits include the box office hits Hope Floats, Miss Congeniality, and 2 Weeks' Notice. The fact that her vision could extend from Hollywood to American living rooms is evidenced by her foray into television, where she produced the long-running sitcom George Lopez. Sandra publicly paid the price, nevertheless, for Hollywood tests every crown. Coming back for Speed 2 Cruise Control, the sequel without Keanu Reeves, she saw the critical acclaim and audience disapproval firsthand. Now that Sandra was the film's face, she was also pulled down as the budget ballooned and the plot stalled. Remembering it made her giggle, and she said, "I think only 5 people like that movie." However, behind, even if it was funny, the shame persisted because she had only agreed to do it so she could make Hope Floats, a film in which she had unwavering faith. Sandra would do anything for the opportunity to share tales that mattered, even if it meant risking failure or humiliation, and her perseverance paid off. The Oscar for The Blind Side finally came to her after years of ascending, falling, and climbing again as she stood on the platform at the Academy Awards. The world noticed that she had personified Lee Anne Tuohi with a strong tenderness. The event should have been a celebration of success, the pinnacle of a career, but instead it was tinged with personal tragedy. Betrayal was causing Sandra and Jesse James' marriage to crumble, even if Sandra was smiling. Only 10 days separated the pinnacle of professional achievement from the depths of personal tragedy. With the same resilience that had gotten her through each rejection, she protected Louis, her newly adopted son, from the mayhem even in that storm. The Academy Award signified more than just a performance. It paid tribute to a woman who stood strong in the face of adversity. After then, there was Gravity, a picture that reviewers and spectators alike were stunned by. Sandra stood alone for the most of the film, yet audiences somehow managed to hand her nearly $700 million. The picture did more than shatter records, it broke them completely. By utilizing a very profitable deals in Hollywood history, Sandra demonstrated that the outsider who was previously teased for her accent and eccentric wardrobe had transformed into an expert negotiator. A strong-willed woman who could manipulate the system, she continued to develop though. Sandra refused to back down when streaming changed Hollywood. It was her victory. Her struggle to defend children in a blind society became an international sensation thanks to Bird Box, which ignited a cultural moment for millions of people around the world. Decades after Speed, her other films The Unforgivable and The Lost City shone that she could still control the box office with her darker, more raw side. She was much the same person throughout her career. Strength developed through adversity, courageous decision-making, and an unwavering defiance of limitations. Her ascent was never merely a result of ovation. Power was regained, dignity was achieved, and faith was unbroken. Once upon a time, there was a young woman named this who would work night shifts cleaning tables and who would make meals out of instant noodles and coffee, who bravely endured freezing temperatures in a New York City flat, risking everything to pursue his ambition. Despite her meager beginnings, the delicate waitress would eventually stand before studio bosses and demand her own terms. Currently, my real estate holdings extend from coast to coast, and I have 20 million salaries and tens of millions more in profit shares. Sandra Bullock's story is more than just a professional saga, a living anthem. It is evidence that success is not bestowed upon you when you are at ease, but worked tirelessly through nights of starvation and rejection. Her incredible journey from a life of ramen to a life of wealth, from obscurity to becoming one of the most bankable stars in the world, serves as a powerful reminder that with unwavering determination, even the darkest winters can be transformed into triumphs. The brightest lights in Hollywood, however, may also create the darkest shadows. How swiftly success can transform into tragedy was something Sandra was about to discover. Just 5 years ago, in July 2005, she had believed she had finally found the missing piece to her life when she went down the aisle with Jesse James in a sunlit wedding in Santa Barbara. They intertwined their realities for a long time. Sandra devoted herself to the goal of having a whole family, while her husband lived his life as a builder and a father. They were so hopeful for the future that they even started the adoption process together, getting ready to have a kid. Early in 2010, it appeared like all the stars had aligned, things that matter: love, family, and work. The season when all wounds were healed was meant to be upon us. Sandra Bullock stood under the lights of the Academy Awards on March 7, 2010, after decades of slogging her way from ramen dinners in a chilly New York apartment to box office stardom. She held the golden statuette for her performance as a caring mother who welcomed a child into her home in the film Blind Side. The applause was deafening, the shutters clicked. The world looked up to her as an example of how bravery and kindness can still make a person remarkable. She was more than simply America's sweetheart for an instant. She embodied its vital essence. However, the illusion was shattered in a few days. The media's coverage of her victory had been overwhelmingly positive until the discoveries of her husband's adultery tore their marriage apart. Sandra was not the one who spoke. It was the tabloids that published graphic, personal, her private anguish thrust into the spotlight as betrayal swept across every front page. During what ought to have been the most sacred time of her life, trust was publicly betrayed. Pulsating like a harsh reminder of loss, the Oscar in her grasp had once been a crown of joy. Claiming to be Hollywood's golden girl, the woman behind the sparkling gown and fake grin was actually taken by surprise. Not according to a plot or a story, but as a result of life's harsh turns. And still the globe was in the dark about a secret that lay within that tempest. Just a few short weeks ago, in January of 2010, Sandra entered her home with a New Orleans baby boy who was 3 months old. He was called Louis by her. A part of her always felt he belonged in a family. Finally, a future that felt solid, 2 parents, 1 home. As a matter of fact, on Oscar night she clutched his little green socks, a secret allure of the fresh existence she was subtly constructing. One day, when her own life was stable, she hoped to introduce him to the world. However, that aspiration was shattered before to its actualization. As she rocked her baby to sleep with one hand and signed divorce papers with the other, she was far from participating in the joy of motherhood alongside her husband. It was a cruel irony. The woman whose portrayal of a nurturing mother came to fame had to become a single parent when her own home fell apart. As midnight meals pass in quiet, as the lights outside her home went out, Sandra had to face the hardest truth. The family she had always dreamed of giving her son had already been destroyed. The burden she bore is heartbreaking to contemplate. Like vultures, paparazzi flocked to her front gate. The news was rife with stories of betrayal. As the room fell silent, the reverberations of the applause remained audible. Despite this, she insisted on responding to her suffering with grace. A mother chose to remain silent, honor her son, and avoid public outcry. No vengeance was manufactured for the cameras. Is there a way to deal with your loss that won't be harmful to your child? Then she thought about it. Philosophy was not that. You had to focus on staying alive. She encased Louis in love during those hushed lullabies, protecting him from experiencing her sadness and teaching him that loathing could be muted compared to love. She achieved her biggest triumph with that decision. Not the Grammys, the red carpet, or the international spotlight, but the unsung heroism of a woman who transformed tragedy into devotion. Scandal swept the globe. Living rebirth was Sandra's life. A performance was acknowledged by Hollywood. A mother's legacy lives on. The unwavering poise of a woman who experienced both triumph and tragedy in the span of a week, and who chose love over treachery to write her next chapter, is her genuine crown, not the golden sculpture that sits on a shelf. And if her pain wasn't bad enough, the fact that a guy had lost a woman whose beauty was priceless was even worse. Sandra Bullock appeared to have weathered every storm that life could throw her way. She had pulled herself together as a single mother after enduring betrayal in the glare of public scrutiny, and she had dedicated her energy to protecting her kid from harm. Fate, however, had more tests in store for her. Reason being, the most horrific things don't always happen in the dark, away from prying eyes and hushed whispers. When everyone else thinks you're asleep, they sneak up on you. Tuesday, June 8, 2014. Tired from a hard day, Sandra went back to her house in Los Angeles. Louis will spend the night in the care of his nanny. The house was silent, the kind of stillness that often heralds tranquility. The stillness finally broke at 1 o'clock in the morning. A low-volume sound soon became audible as it gained proximity. She mistook it for the gym. Next it shifted. Anxiety gripped her chest. The building was occupied. Locking herself in her bedroom, she ducked into her closet and, hands shaking, dialed 911. The idea that she was no longer a homeowner and that her safety had been taken away caused her voice to drop to a whisper on the conversation. Time seemed to stretch on forever. It wasn't just an invader hiding behind the door. That terror may still find a way in despite all the precautions taken was a harsh reality. The guy was apprehended. A mysterious visitor named Joshua Corbett had been following her for days, dropping notes and lurking in the shadows. Included in his possession were photographs of her face and a letter that muddled the line between obsession and hallucination. He had a number of guns. The dread he left it behind was more powerful than any weapon he had that night. No one could see the scars. Her neurological system was home to them. Out of nowhere, panic would ensue. Even something as mundane as staring out the car window brought up tears. She freely confessed that the night played over and over in her body, causing her to unravel. Not only did she suffer from dread, but she was also haunted by the thought that her son Louis would inherit tremors that were not expressed in blood but in quiet. Hence she decided to try eye movement desensitization and reprocessing EMDR therapy.
fragment by fragment recovering tranquility for both herself and the young kid who was deserving of growing up in the light. Sandra Bullock had weathered the storms of Hollywood. She had weathered mental storms before. A truth more eerie than any role she had ever portrayed was in her struggle, that not even the most brilliant stars can escape the shadows, and that the strongest survivors are those who struggle to overcome them. Sandra Bullock raised Louis, the son of her ex-husband, with an air of quiet dignity for many years after their divorce. In 2010, she gave him the protection he needed from the whirlwind of fame that she had wished for herself. However, there was still a void that could only be filled by genuine friendship, even while enveloped in the most genuine affection. Brian Randall, a photographer, entered her home in 2015 to record Louis's 5th birthday celebration, and that altered everything. Oscar winner and box office queen Sandra, beloved around the world as America's sweetheart, encountered someone who couldn't perceive her. Just her he saw. Their unexpectedly strong bond felt like it had been waiting for them the whole time, and what started as a professional hire soon turned into something more. As their love deepened, Sandra found herself opening up to Brian all over again. In late 2015, when she took in Isla, a courageous little girl in foster care who had been through more than any child should have to face. After a career as a model and photographer, Brian brought the experience and insight of a father to the table. Being a father to his own daughter had given him an innate knowledge of the duties of love, as well as qualities of patience and tenderness. Rapidly, he transcended his role as Sandra's associate. Louis and Isla looked up to him as a father figure. He was a rock who matched Ila's devotion with his own warmth. He was more than simply mom's sidekick. He was the entertaining dad who brought joy and warmth into the kids' lives. They may not have tied the knot, but Sandra and Brian were deeply committed to one another. Their mutual friends who observed their public appearances together gushed about the serenity she exuded, ease that rounded out her rough spots. Sandra had finally found safety after years of heartbreak, isolation, and sleepless nights, worried that love had left her to die. They were experiencing an unstageable level of joy in their home. As the bus passes by, the sound of children laughing fills the air. After the kids were asleep, there would be late-night kitchen chatter while birthday candles glowed in the gentle glow of family love. The remarkable felt like this regular thing to a woman who had spent decades beneath the brightest lights of Hollywood. It was the long-awaited dream that she had worried would remain just that, a dream. The hope of having a full, loving, and firmly authentic family. The pain is nearly too much to. It's hard to fathom how life can be so cruel when a woman thinks she's finally found a sanctuary. In 2020, Sandra Bullock was handed a devastating blow that no amount of time spent alone, betrayed, or healing could ever heal. Her home's transformation into a residence was accomplished by Brian Randall. The father her children looked up to as an anchor was diagnosed with amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, ALS, a terrible disease that drained him of strength piece by piece, crushing his spirit even as it betrayed him physically. Their combined quietness became a pact. Sandra would subsequently tell a small group of people that they didn't want a countdown to ruin the child's happiness. Love, not shame, was the driving force behind the secrecy. Instead of having quiet talks about their decline, Louis and Isla deserved a birthday party with balloons. Because of this, Sandra subtly distanced herself from society. The days of premieres and red carpets are over. She transformed her stage into a kitchen and prepared his favorite foods. At her side, she murmured words of solace during the wee hours. A house that became a haven of healing as nurses became an integral part of the family's daily routine. There was hardly any mention of her at that time. Scratches, whispers of the paparazzi, brief encounters, hidden from prying eyes. Sandra was enduring the most challenging role she had ever encountered. She gained the rhythm of machines, soothed him through the long nights when sleep would not come, and spoon-fed him with a patience born of devotion while being an actress revered by millions. She refused to let the man she loved confront his disease alone. Instead of remembering their father for the illness, Louis and Isla would remember the love that enveloped him right up until he passed away, thanks to her efforts to keep the house warm, play music he loved, and keep laughter alive. Fragments, like the arch of his smile when Louis cracked a joke, clung to her. That look in his eyes became more lenient after Layla placed a sketch she had produced into his palm. He mustered all his power to whisper the thank yous, which meant everything yet cost him everything. There was a golden dust quality to every second. She would remember those words years later, and they encapsulated the reality. She had led him through his lowest points, not in a state of despair but with a love so intense that it made even the smallest act feel timeless. Then on August 5, 2023, the unimaginable happened with a brutality that no one could have anticipated. At 57 years old, Brian Randall is incredibly youthful, passed suddenly after 3 years of being progressively disabled by amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, ALS, a disease that first took away his ability to move and then his voice, leaving only his eyes to convey what his body had failed to. As if under an insurmountable weight, Sandra held his hand while her children clung to her. No scripts, no cameras, and no applause. The splintered cries of loss echoing through the house. Their once jovial home was now devoid of the man who had brought so much joy there. Enormous, as if it could devour the very air. It was unimaginable tragedy for Sandra. Life had denied her love, but she had found it at last. A man who cherished Sandra for who she was, a woman, not a star. In addition, she had no choice but to observe as he dissipated like smoke in her hands. Each act of resistance against time, every restless night, every murmured vow at his bedside had been a cost. Time continued to prevail. The loss was like a scar that Louis and Layla, who were too little to put a name to it, would always feel. They had slipped pictures into his hands and crawled onto his lap for stories. A thief no one dared to confront had shattered their once complete family of 4. Everyday delights, birthday candles, shared meals, and the subtle wonder of belonging were no longer echoed throughout the house. It was as if the walls had kept him in your thoughts, and the quietness of his passing is a sobering reminder that fate can extinguish the fires of even the most radiant dreams. For Sandra, who had weathered every tempest Hollywood could throw at her, including betrayal and humiliation, this loss was more intense, unfiltered, and brutal. News outlets would never be able to cover it. Even the Oscar she had on display couldn't console it. She was unprotected by her fame. It has lost more than just that. It was the breaking of the one and only sanctuary she had ever constructed. Still, she got to her feet in that intolerable stillness, passing on not just the love that had been but also the whole definition of what it is to love deeply. Even though the story ends on a bittersweet note, her trials were far from over. Another storm broke out only 9 days after Brian's death, while her heart was still raw with grief. This time it's on a global platform, and not in her living room. Out of nowhere, the film that had brought millions of people together with its message of compassion, The Blind Side, which had won Sandra an Oscar, was embroiled in controversy. A lawsuit was filed against the Tuohi family by the film's inspiration, Michael O'Hare, who claimed to have been cheated and misled. Sandra was never involved with the law, but the film catapulted her into the public eye nevertheless. That represented her previous pinnacle of success. The events that transpired were both brutal and unjust. Instead of expressing sorrow for her demise, many took to the merciless platform of social media to make demands, as if she were to shoulder the blame for circumstances completely beyond her influence by returning her Academy Award. Just think of the cruelty. After 8 years of what she considered a partnership, a woman is devastated when she is unexpectedly murmurs that cast doubt on her honesty rather than her performance. Once she was brought to her knees, the very role that had propelled her to the pinnacle of her profession became a weapon to harm her. One hit was very private, and the other was quite public. A single brutal season brought together the losses of love and peace. Someone else might have been broken by it. Sandra, on the other hand, exhibited none of these negative emotions in her response. The option to remain silent was hers. Dignity was her choice. After losing all other sources of stability, she refocused her strength on motherhood by choosing to protect Louis and Ella. Her real power is most apparent in that regard, in the manner she perseveres, rather than in the multi-billion-dollar box office or the gilded statue displayed on a shelf. In spite of treachery, she has loved, cared for while enduring disease and tragedy. The world harshly condemned her in 2023, and she weathered a tempest that would last a lifetime, the loss of her great love, but she still stood there unmoved, unbroken, an elegant woman who responds gracefully to harshness. Sandra Bullock's life is about more than just her success in the spotlight. Survival through adversity is the central theme.